you want me to introduce it, or do you want to have a go?
No. You do go for it.
Me? Why? Okay.
Well, you did choose it.
I did choose it. That's true. Okay. Right.
me.
Ugh. Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our campaigns. With me, again, third time's the charm, is the lovely, wonderful Sam. Sam. How are you? How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. Lockdown. Same old.
Location.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Well, again, better for seeing you because obviously, we see each other mostly through the online format of Zoom most weeks. So that's been nice and hanging out and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. What a way to bring down the podcast.
Yeah.
Well. Let's start with something more positive. So, Sam, do you want to know what I've brought you into the Zoom call to talk about today?
What have you chosen today, Fiona?
I'm glad you asked. So, the reason I kind of wanted to talk about this particular topic with you, Sam, is that I feel like you and I, when we create characters, we like looking for different things. There's a mixture of, let's see what kind of stats you can get and build it up from that. But also, I think both of us really do like a good character arc or a character story. And I think in these 3 races that I've chosen to look at for us to discuss today, each one of them have the potential to have some really, really good role-playing aspects. I don't know whether or not they would be good if you were trying to min-max or anything like that at all. But I think if you were coming into a game of D&D through a storytelling perspective and you weren't entirely sure what to do, but you knew you didn't want to be the sort of classical elf, dwarf, gnome or human, you're like, well, what else is there? And I think these 3 races can do it. So we're looking at the Volo's Guide to Monsters. The 3 races we're looking at today are Firbolgs, which I believe that's pronunciation, unless you've got a different pronunciation. Okay, you're just nodding.
That's how I've been saying it.
Okay, good.
Firbolgs.
Firbolgs? I think so. Firbolgs, which is spelled Firbolg. Sorry, I was really struggling to think of S. Oh, yes, S. Very good at plurals. So Firbolgs, Kenku, and Triton. So 3 very different types of races. So Sam, do you have any experience with these? Have you made any characters with them, or have you read them in any detail at all before this?
Not really. I mean, Firbolgs have become, we're both watchers of Critical Role, so the Firbolgs and Kenku have become quite a thing now because of that. So Taliesin playing as one of the tall, nature-loving, vengeful tree hugger folk. and then they have Kenku in there. But apart from that, I haven't really used them or played with them. I suppose, actually, our very first D&D game together had Kenkus in it, didn't it?
It did. That's the first time I'd ever heard of them at all. I had no idea what they were. So actually seeing them being played was as a minor character as well. But obviously later on, they became a playable race, which I then did play very briefly for a session with you, which is again, we'll go on to the reasons why that's very interesting when we delve into Kenku. But Triton is a very interesting one for me because I'd, again, not really heard much about them before, but reading about them makes them very, not bombastic, that's not the word, but they're very
pompous bellends.
You know what? I couldn't have put it in any finer words, Sam.
They're so irritating just reading it through. They're like, never invite one of these to a party. They'd be just like, yeah, I fought so many water elementals. I'm like the best, yeah.
Yeah, you might have heard of me. Yeah. We'll start at the top. So Sam, you've done a little bit of reading this. Maybe you could give us a quick overview of what Firbolgs are then. Off the top of your head, what is it to be a Firbolg?
Okay, so Firbolgs are, as I mentioned, tall, nature-loving, tree-hugger style things. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I'll probably usually describe the appearance of what we're talking about. Yes. But the books don't describe or have any description of these characters of all of the ones we're talking about, which I thought was quite weird. Just illustrations. They say they're tall. Yeah. They say they're big, but they don't say what they look like in any of the text or anything. But the illustrations kind of show them as being these big old humanoids, but with kind of bovine features. So kind of big cow-like noses and big floppy ears and kind of dark coloured, kind of bluish skin. But yeah, no description of what they look like. And they are very much one with nature, living as a society, protecting the forests and deterring outsiders, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting that they don't have names per se. And I guess not naive of the outside world, but very kind of separate to it in a way, but very friendly, but not to other people. Kind of racist, actually.
I actually, very recently, both me and Ryan talked about the GIF, which we've seen in our campaign as the space hippos with muskets. And reading about them, they're quite interesting because they are sort of a military organization stuff, and they are very xenophobic in the sense of they like being with their own kind, and they'll deal with other people, but they think they're the best, essentially. Whereas here, you're right, Firbolgs, they like keeping to themselves, but as you said, they are sort of, well, caretakers of the forest. They sort of look after the sacred place, and they like striking this balance with nature. So very prone to being druidic, living in sort of almost like a commune type style, taking what you need, essentially, is what I got from this. Like, you know, if there's no such thing as a greedy Firbolg, and any adventurers that come crashing through the wood is deemed to be unworthy of the sacred space or anything like that, they will be put upon. So then they are, you know, not aggressive, but they can hold their own, which I thought was interesting. And in a way, I imagine them to be a bit like, if you remember sort of in Lord of the Rings, the forests of Lothlorien, where the elves are just sort of there, but always are sort of hidden. And it was a really cool paragraph which talked about, you know, if there's Firbolgs in the forest because it's just very quiet. There's no sound of wildlife, but it's like that unnerving quiet means that you have to leave, which I thought was quite an interesting thing. Yeah, because obviously, again, looking at the image, like you said, there's sort of this impression of like, compared to space hippos, it's like cow people. It's like, there's no nice way of putting this.
Look at my udders.
But with the Firbolgs, I like the idea that they are stealthy, they are quiet. And it's that sort of an unnerving thing saying, well, we've allowed you to be in this forest for us. You know, the fact you can see us means that we trust you, but you need to leave now. And I think there was an interesting concept they had. So yeah, they sort of take what you need, but they had this thing where, yeah, they prefer the subtle sort of gentle approach rather than full on confrontation, which I thought was good. Again, it does give you that things like, oh, like you said, one with nature, peace is the way forward, and that sort of thing. And it goes into a little bit of detail about the different classes you can have. Is it likely you'll have Firbolg barbarians? And it said it's very unlikely, but it doesn't stop you. You know, it's one of, yeah, it's like,
I don't like that wording.
Do you
I find
not?
that really, oh no, I found it quite, I don't like it when the books are, oh, you could play as this, but it's very unusual.
Interesting.
When it comes to a fantasy thing, you just want to create what you create, do you? But I don't know. What do you feel?
I think that's really interesting, because I guess for me, because usually, I don't know how it is for you, because obviously you run a lot more D&D than I do. I think as a DM, a lot of the times I run a lot of games for people who've never played the system before and never necessarily played D&D before. So I instantly limit the options a little bit, because there's that thing of being overwhelmed completely. So if it was D&D, it's like, oh, they want to play something that's a little bit more beyond the field of human, elf, dwarf, etc. Like, well, what about these? Ideally, here's their background. So you could do, you know, it's like sort of saying, do you want to be a person that shoots with magic, or do you want to be a ranger? But like, if you're like, oh, you've got something in mind, well, they're more likely to be a ranger or a druid, etc. It's limiting the options, but I think, like with all things that we've discussed on this podcast, actually, it shouldn't limit you, and you shouldn't. And it's a mixture of, like, I think just being aware of when you read a character, be like, this is cool. Be like, okay, but what does it come with? Like, what's the background of it? How does your Firbolg adventurer fit with other adventurers? Like, what makes them different? Why are they adventuring? And I think you just need to put that in and then tweak it so it fits with your world. Because ultimately, the book's there just to be like, here's a base of what we think they're like. But it can be whatever you want, really.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. I was like, oh, noobs. But you're absolutely right. Being able to give someone a chapter and say, do you want to play as this whole deal, is incredibly helpful to people who don't necessarily have the background to have that ability to create an entire character backstory and feel. But at the same time, there's not a lot of, I think, what struck me most, sorry, and we will go on to the other sorry, I'm derailing this entirely now.
Sam, do not derail. Keep going. You're doing great.
it's quite a compact chapter in a book that's predominantly aimed at dungeon masters to have this kind of little segment on players. And compared to some of the other character creation chapters in supplemental books, there's not much to help kickstart ideas, I'd say.
Agreed. Yeah.
So like in Mordred Canaan's Tome of Foes and Santa Claus Guide, you have like examples of story hooks you could choose, background tidbits, and just lots of like little things just to make them unique, I guess. This book, Volo, does have like a few suggested bits and bobs, but it's like, what's your quirk?
And it's not necessarily consistent between the races as well. So like you were about to say, I'm sure this is what you're about to say. So with Firbolgs, it's very unlikely they'll go adventuring. And if they are adventuring, it's usually because they've been exiled from their family, because social connection is really important to them. So either exiled or they're the only ones left, or there's some other big reason. And this one is very sad. And it has a table for adventuring for Firbolgs. Because again, just to give you an idea, I'm sure like could come up with your own ideas. But I guess it's just making sure that like why it's a bit like, you know, if you're being the it's what I call like the fable character. So you're an orphan, your parents are dead, but it's okay because you have no connection stuff. At least with these sort of you have the backstory, you have the possibility of like, well, I do have a clan, but I don't talk to them anymore. And that could be like, again, story hooks for later and stuff. So I think it's one of those things where I agree. I think it's very limited in like what it gives you. It's like a little pocket bit of history about Firbolgs, and then this, and then the stats, and that's it. It would be nice to have some more history about it. I mean, this is me. I don't know if you know, Sam, if they are in D&D from previous editions, or if there's been more about them recently. And to go back, actually, sorry, very quickly to what you're saying about like you could choose whatever class you're in. Obviously, with the new Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they're now doing that thing where you don't apply negative stats. And you can choose which is your plus stat. So you can be the Firbolg barbarian. You just move the stats around. What were you thinking in terms of Firbolgs? Like in terms of characters? So you say you would try some different types of classes to go with it then?
You know me, I like to be awkward.
No, that's good. That's why you're on the podcast.
I was thinking that you could have some like really good story hooks and just background stuff like, what was the nature of the place where you grew up? What was the forest like where you grew up? Was it fruits? Was it kind of a place like with nicking completely off Critical Role? Was it a place where people went to be their final rested place? Or it's something like that, something where the trees, I don't know, clean the water, something like that. And now that area is not running, the water has poisoned, you've got to find a cure for that. Things like that. Yeah, I don't know. Firbolgs, it's not necessarily a class that I would choose to play as. I don't know. Would you ever play as a Firbolg?
Again, it's that sort of thing, because I don't play in many D&D campaigns regularly, and if I do, it's a one-shot here and there. And I'm very boring, as you know, Sam. I'm like, human or gnome, and that's it. Because, but I think it'd be nice to try it. But like you said, I think I need to check myself sometimes with this sort of thing, because obviously the way it's described, being a Firbolg, it's about, being a little bit more reserved, thinking about that balance, taking what you need. Like money doesn't mean anything to you, like material goods, whatever, as long as you have enough to get by. And I think the way D&D is in general, it's a video game. You got the combat heavy stuff, you got paid for your things. Now you can live whatever. So I think there's a lot of things you maybe need to justify with certain choices, but that may be a challenge. And I think I'd be interested to play it. I think because it talks about they are natural druids, so they'll have a little bit of spell casting, which I think could appeal to people who may not, be comfortable with like full-on spell casting classes. Because I certainly am not. You try a wizard for a bit, and it's bloody terrifying.
Best.
So I think I would go for something maybe like a fighter or a ranger, which is not necessarily out there per se, because you've got the strength of it and you've got a little bit of spellcasting, which is about disguising yourself essentially. But other than that, I think it'd be interesting to try it, but maybe it just completely depends on the setting and making sure that the choices you make are in keeping with that sort of the lawful sort of neutral alignment that because you're protecting the forest, you're thinking of the balance in nature and stuff. So
yeah, there's a lot to judge with that. The best thing about them, though, I love their ability to speak to animals and plants, but not necessarily understand what they say in return.
Yes, so that's the speech of beast and leaf, isn't it?
It's a wonderful concept, because the rest of the party are like, is he just talking to himself? And I was thinking, you could do this with any character. You could just have a character who speaks to things as if he understands them.
As a proper like RPG, an RP choice completely. And they've got a really cool thing where it's called Hidden Step, which we've seen used on Critical Role, whereas as a bonus action, they can make themselves invisible until the beginning of their next turn. So if you attack and then you're realizing you're in trouble, you just go, oh, and then you go invisible and then run away so that you get disadvantaged and no one knows where you are and stuff. So that's quite a cool little like trick you can do, I think. I thought that was quite... Again, I don't know if any other, unless you're actually casting invisibility or thing, I don't know any other race that has that innateness to sort of suddenly hide themselves in the forest. So
no, and it seems quite bizarre because they're like 7 feet. Just like,
hello, oh God,
I'm stealthy.
Can't see me. Wouldn't it be great? Like, it reminds me of I can't remember which story it's from now, but it's like, that whole thing is like, if it can't see you, you can't see it. So I'm invisible. The hands over his eyes, and we can still see you. No, and runs away. Let's move on to Kenku then. So Sam, can you give us another sort of brief overview of what Kenku are? Yeah.
So Kenku are, again, there's not a huge amount of description what they look like, but as illustrated, they are this kind of avian, kind of crow or raven style appearance, but without wings. And the explanation of this is that their ancient ancestors were once, I guess, minions to a very powerful being who set them out to gain treasures and things. But was it that they betrayed him and tried to keep some of the treasure for themselves, I think? Something like that? Yeah,
something like that. Their greed got the most of them and they were planning to do something dreadful to their overlord, essentially, yeah.
So kind of like magpies, they're overpowered by their need for shiny things. And this powerful creature cursed them so that... There was 3 things. There was one, they lose their wings. Second thing was they lose their voice and they can only mimic what they hear. And the third thing, which I haven't clocked until today, is that they lose creativity.
Yeah.
Which, how do you roleplay that in a game of Dungeons and Dragons? Where you're like, well, I have a great idea of getting into this fortress, but I'm a stupid, creativity-less creature, so I'm just going to stand there going, oh.
That is literally it. It is one of those things where it's, like you said, like bound to the earth. Yeah, can't use their voice, can only mimic the sounds they've heard. Oh, and they've lose the spark of creativity, and you're like, fuck. It's like, as both you and I are very creative people, it's like, God, what must be that world like? It's a grey world. There's no colour. There's nothing.
Well, it's like having a party full of accountants. Sorry, Ryan, if you listen to this.
He never listens. It's fine. And it's very brutal how it described it as well. Like the spark of creativity was torn from their souls, and you're like, oh God, that's so evocative as an image. But I think the reason that sort of comes into it quite a bit is that later on it talks about, like, what roles in society they have, these Kenku. And it's mostly that they are sort of living on the outskirts. They are, like, as you said, they are attracted by the shiny things in life and maybe are prone to being doing some more uncouth and unsavory roles. So being burglars, spies, messengers for thieves guilds and that sort of thing. But the thing about the creativity stuff is that so they can mimic anything, so any sound, and they can recreate stuff really, really well. Like craftsmanship is quite good, but they can't create anything new. All of it has to be copied, a reproduction of the original. And again, that's like what's good about it in a way for the masters, essentially, is that these creatures can only give the information you give. They can't twist it. They can't change it. So you can trust them to do it because they can't. There's no way they can change it. And again, because it talks about them being very good minions, because obviously they need someone to look after them and stuff because they can't do anything else. So it's a fascinating, I guess, just a fascinating thing because compared to Firbolgs, who are, good and protect the forest and stuff. Here on the other side, you've got the outskirts. They love material wealth because they like the shiny things, and they'll do anything to sort of get it in a way. Like you said, like magpies, but they don't have the gift of describing it. They have to use the sounds and stuff that they hear.
Which must make role-playing quite difficult for them.
Well, Sam, let's talk about that. So we had a session. You invited me to a session where I decided, sod it, I'll play a Kenku. And I think it talks about it a little bit in the book about how to role play. It did say, like, look, you can create all these noises and stuff, but it's going to get irritating for not only you, but for everyone. And I would agree with that, absolutely. But then I think it's a good third way, because, some people don't like necessarily role playing as themselves. Like, you don't say, well, I'm going to act like this and I'm going to put on my big person's voice and shout at these people. Sometimes people narrate in the third person. So like Sansa goes and looks out over the keep, etc. So this, I think, is a good way of doing it, because it describes it as, like, to show that you're bored, you make the sound of a tongue's like taking its time, like bong, bong, and then describing it like that to show you're bored. I guess you could always then just proper summarize it by saying, oh, TikTok, which was what my Kenku was, TikTok describes the plan, reiterates what all the different options that we've gone through in the last half an hour in great detail, doing both sides of the conversation. I think there's two ways to go about it. I think I find it hilarious when it's in short bits where, they said, what are you? And you just repeat back, well, what are you? And you have to do your best impression of the other players and see if they understand. And then after that, you can choose as the role player to be like, describes this and makes the sounds of this and stuff like that. So you can put it out. But again, I guess it depends on how much effort you want to go into that, not only as a player, but as a DM as well. Because we've seen it on Critical Role where it can get very distracting. You're like, well, we need to go on this mission, but we want to talk to Kiri, who's super cute, and says, kill other things.
Yeah, Matt really working hard with that one.
Was there anything that you quite liked about Kenku at all, or is there anything that you're like, would you play a Kenku at all, or have ones that aren't necessarily me in your campaign?
I haven't played myself as one, but I think they're fantastic. I've had them not through my own homebrew choice, but in the what's it called? Dragon Heist, Waterdeep. Your players come across a group of Kenku working for the Zentarum Black Guild of Criminals. And my party are quite nice. They tend to capture sentient folk rather than just murder hoboing anything that stands in their way. But it proved quite an interesting exercise in interrogation. So they're like, where is your leader? And they could only kind of reiterate the sounds of running water, and then the players are like, "Ooh, is that the river, or is that sewers, or is that?" And then if they're struggling, you can add a bit more, and your Kenku mimics the sound of a gruff, orcish, angry man going, "Take them to the sewers," and then they're like, yeah, sewers. Okay, let's go to.
Got it. I think the other thing I quite like about Kenku is because then because it's like, well, why would a Kenku set out to be an adventurer and be sort of different to other Kenkus who would want to stay within a thieves guild or want to stay within a protection place of some sorts? And it talks about, like, either, again, the flock that they're a part of has suffered heavy losses. So you're like, oh God, again, little orphan Kenku coming out to play. Or a wary Kenku has grown tired of crime. And I thought, ooh, that'll be cool. Like a slightly older, again, they only live to like 60 years old. So it's quite a short time span. But an older Kenku who's like, fuck this. Like a proper Witcher-esque, like on crime. Like, crime doesn't pay. Like, I
like that.
Those individual Kenkus who become adventurers are, ambitious and daring and willing to try stuff. And actually, one thing we've not mentioned is that the main sort of driving force for Kenku, compared to like Firbolgs are going, we must protect the forest, take what you need. The thing they care about more than material and shiny things is to be able to fly again and to get their wings back in some respect. And that's like an inherent little thing that they have. It means that they will happily live in the top of towers. They will happily go places that are very, very high. But if they got a choice, they would want to learn how to fly again or get some ability to fly in some way. And I thought that would be an interesting, like, again, if they got something like the wings of flying or learning spellcasting to fly would be quite interesting as well. Again, another sort of story hook going into that. Their only mission is to learn how to be higher than other Kenku would be really interesting, I thought.
I also thought their other kind of driving force is that they need companions in order to gain more for their soundboard, I guess, of things that are happening. So you could have a Kenku who seeks out places where they can hear things so that they can communicate better. So I was thinking, would you have Kenkus who served at bard or theatres because of just the number of noises and people and talking? And then would you get Kenkus who travel to, struggling to think of anywhere else now, but they'd be like recording sounds of rare things like monsters and bird calls as a scholar to then return to a library and being able to recite a pigeon sounds like this. Ooh, I don't know.
No, I think that's really cool. Actually, that they're actually more than just messengers. They are information gatherers. Like from what you described, then I was like thinking, maybe not as maybe interesting, but working in a tavern, but overhearing conversations and be like, oh, Audrey, that sort of like gossip column-esque type thing.
Oh, like the weird little baby like creature in She-Ra. What happened to that in the end? Anyway, we could discuss She-Ra later.
She-Ra later, but She-Ra is really good. I think the only thing I wanted to quickly add on Kenku, so they don't live very long. They're chaotic neutral, which makes sense that they are just bananas as birds in general and a law unto themselves. But their naming system, so we talked a little bit about names for Firbolgs being sort of like, usually Firbolgs adopt Elvish names or it's about their role or function and stuff. With Kenku, there's like 3 different categories, which essentially is the noises that weapons make. So you'd be like, if it's the sound of like a slash of a sword, you might call them slasher or basher or something like that. Animal noises, so like if they're recreating like a lion or a tiger or something, it's like growler or growler or something like that.
Oh, not growler.
Growler.
Don't call it that.
And then the one that I quite like is the one I quite like is the noises of craft. So if it's like tongues and the hammer, like the making of the like blacksmiths, smithy and craftsmanship. So that's why for me I was like, what sort of onomatopoeia noises are there? Like boing and like whoosh.
Boing.
I don't know. Well, but that's the thing. Like, so that's why I thought TikTok was quite a good one.
Yeah, that was a great name for a Kenku.
Or you can describe it as, it's like, you say, what's your name? And they just make the sound of a ticking clock. And you're like, we'll call you TikTok. So, yeah. So I just thought it's quite nice, a different way of thinking about names that are just sound only. And obviously there are cultures in the world that, don't have names as we know them. They are just the way the tongue clicks and moves and stuff. So I thought this is it's something a little bit different.
So the last thing I had on Kenku,
right,
is that their mimicry is like a shared trait with other creatures in mythology. So I think, like, is it the Wendigo who can mimic the sound of like crying babies or something?
Oh yes, I think it is the Wendigo actually. They're terrifying.
So if you're an adventurer going into a forest and then you suddenly hear a crying baby or someone trying to lure you into the forest, like Geralt would be, probably Wendigo, we should go. And there's just like a Kenku giggling behind the shrubs or something.
Wendigos are pretty, from my, a long time ago, but possibly really recent, Supernatural. There are Wendigos in every fucking season. They are terrifying creatures. But I like that. Yeah, using it as a way to lure people in, and then maybe like the bandit camp that the Kenkus are part of springs a trap on those people. So like if you call out like, help, save me, help, and then people, the adventurers rush in, and then it's a big trap thanks to Kenku. They're like, oh. Let's talk about Tritons. Sam, what have we got on Tritons?
Oh, you're making me describe all of the dudes, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Tritons are pompous sea people, by all accounts. They initially inhabited, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, that they initially inhabited the plane of water. So one of these other kind of otherworldly dimensions, which is just mostly, if not all, water of various nature. So rain, storms, and seas. And their entire deal was hunting down and killing water elementals, these kind of sentient beings of evil water, where they're just hunting them down and fighting them down into the crushing depths of this plane where the water is the pressure is so heavy that they can continue their quarry to kill these things off. And for a while they were all, yeah, we're the best. We killed so many water elementals.
We're on it.
And then somehow, I'm not sure if it's explained in the book, but they figure out that the water elementals have just thought, well, sod being here, we're being harassed by these assholes. We're going to go to the normal plane of existence and just piss off mortals. So after this has happened, they're like, oh, well, it's a bit bored now. You know, we haven't got any water elementals to hunt down and then brag about hunting. Let's go to the normal plane and kill them there.
Yeah, might as well. Yeah.
And then boast about how amazing we are to all the people we meet.
Yes. It's so weird. I genuinely had never heard of Tritons before, and in reading it, I was like, oh, and I literally wrote down in my notes because it's one of the subheadings, but haughty nobles.
Haughty is a good word. Yes,
and it properly describes them. Like we were joking before, like like it feels very like oh yeah, we just went down and just killed some water elementals, no biggie, haha. But literally, it feels like that a lot because obviously, when you think of sort of merfolk or any sort of folk of the sea, you're thinking mermaids. You're thinking that sort of very King Triton and his daughters, that sort of thing. And looking at again a really good illustration as well, you see these are creatures of the depths. They are humanoid, but they've got the scales. They are very blue skin, blue like gills, fangs on their necks. No,
frilly bit dorsal fin style things.
Yeah, like all around them. So they look very otherworldly, which I think is always cool, like very alien essentially. So if you saw one up and about in the world above, it is quite a peculiar sight. And it's one of those things where I assume they would be quite rare. And actually all of these creatures, I think they would be quite rare in some places because obviously they're very well hidden, or they are because of their job or because of the way they are. And Tritons, I just think they just don't like going on land. They're like, well, they talk about like not understanding the world above because obviously they're like, well, you've heard of us. We don't need to hear of you. That's sort of, again, a very almost not xenophobic, but that's well, we're great. Well, we won't bother ourselves. We won't concern ourselves with your concerns. Like, why would anyone want to be out of the water? There's a great thing it talked about because they can control water and air to an extent. They can cast fog cloud and stuff, but I love the idea that their sort of their arrogance compounds the tendency not to understand the surface world. So again, in this one they have a great quirks table, which some of these wings are just like, the first one is that you phrase requests as orders you expect to be obeyed. Like,
jeez.
And actually, when I was thinking about like, well, where else would you see sort of this type of personality? And I was thinking you could see it in like Thor, when like the way that Thor sort of presents himself, oh, yes, quick, Jane, you must help me. And they're like, who the fuck are you? Like that sort of, because obviously, they are great warriors and stuff, and they've protected the depths, but because they've done such a good job, no one knows who they are. Oh, the other one I quite liked was that you've learnt an equated version of common and dropped the thee and thou into your speech. God. So again, that very pretentious, almost Shakespearean, like, thou must finish what you're doing, or something like that, like proper like performance style. So yeah, I just something about them being the champions of the sea, but being so big-headed and almost diva-ish in a way. I
like the line, which is, they don't quite understand how on the surface world you can't go up and down, only forwards and
so it's like, this doesn't seem to work. It's very what's he called? The guy in the IT crowd, the boss, that's played by Mike Berry, is like, father! Like, again, it's that sort of like, why is it not working? Speak to the box, the internet box.
Oh, they'd make great, I suppose you couldn't make them villains, but, well, you could, of course. It's all guidelines, but you could make them like obnoxious frenemies or something like that. So like, you're on the sea and they're going, how dare you? Move your boat over my sea.
Do you have permission? They're described as their sort of alignment is lawful good. So they do follow like a code of conduct. So I guess they'd be very good for like paladins, for example, or anything like that. But and it's how I see paladins as well. It's like they have the notion of what they think is good and what they think is right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone thinks it's the same thing. So again, that sort of thing where, could you imagine if it was like some sort of horrific bureaucratic thing where you get served a notice from the local Tritons saying like, you have encroached your fishing boats on our land, so we are requesting you to stop it. And they're like, no, who the fuck are you? We've never seen you before,
Or you could do like at the beginning of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it turns out that Arthur's house is going to get demolished, and he said, well, you've had months to put in a planning complaint that we're going to flood your entire city. I mean, it's been in the local sea post office. Yeah, but we can't breathe underwater. Well, if you haven't developed diving helmets, it's your fault. Really.
Yeah, you should have thought of that. That's sort of, because ultimately it does say that they are, benevolent. Ooh, words are not good. They're good creatures at heart. Benevolent. There's a benevolent in the room. But they are good creatures at heart. Like, you can play it if you want to have a villain Triton. I'm sure that's fine as well. But I like the idea. It feels, again, better for a role play aspect that these people want to do good. They just don't understand different cultures. And it feels, again, very, very sort of a little bit like the GIF in a way, very British in the sense of like when you go to a different country, in order to communicate, you speak louder rather than necessarily learning the actual language. I think that Tritons must do that quite a bit, like because they've got common and primordial, but probably like, oh, hello, yes, welcome. That's sort of like, hello, do you speak common? Like, yes, oh, good. What I thought was quite interesting, sort of the other sort of tail end of that. So they fight for the good, and they, the caretakers of the sea, etc. But because of this arrogance about people should know who they are, but they don't know who anyone else is, like they don't concern themselves with matters of land and stuff, is that they are quite vulnerable to encountering creatures for the first time. And so they may be like more likely to be sort of not necessarily friendly towards them, but they might underestimate encounters and stuff. Like, oh, it's easy, we can deal with this. And then it's someone who uses gunpowder, or it's someone who has a lot of magic, like oh dear. So it gives them that sort of vulnerability as well, a good sort of another point to sort of go into role play, etc. I mean, was there anything that stood out for you in terms of Tritons in general? Like, would you ever play one, or are you thinking they're too haughty for you?
I'd be more tempted to play as a sea elf, I think, which were in a different book, because they're mechanically almost identical, actually.
Oh, really? How interesting.
Well, from what I vaguely recall and a quick Google, they're quite similar, but I don't know. I just like the sea elf history of being like, living on the ground sucks. Let's go live in the sea. They've got the same elvish haughtiness, but I don't know. They seem less jock bra.
Again, looking at the traits for Tritons, so they live up to 200 years, so they're around for a little bit longer than the others. I like the fact that they are slightly shorter than humans. So they have a very sort of not short person complex, but that sort of thing where you're like, oh really, you defend the sea? That sort of, I just have that in my head. But then also similar to Firbolgs, with their sort of being able to communicate, they can communicate simple ideas with beasts that breathe water, which I thought would be quite interesting. Again, that you just talk to starfish and they like, come friend, let us go, and it's like, it's again, I just imagine just having companions with you, and you're just covered in fish. You're like, I don't understand. I tried to tell them to go away, and they just clung on to me.
Imagine walking through a fishing village. It'd be like slaughtered, like, no, my friend.
It's like, Gary, no. Why? The key thing, actually, throughout all the traits, because obviously you got your Kenkus have the mimicry thing, so they can deceive a lot better. You've got Firbolgs who can go invisible for bonus action. The key thing with Tritons is this sort of Guardian of the Depth, which I think is actually quite significant. It's resistance to cold damage, which is good. And then no drawbacks caused by deep underwater environments, which we've not really necessarily played with ourselves. But if you were playing a campaign which a lot of it was underwater, and you was going to go very, very deep. There are rules about like, okay, concentration checks or like the crushing things. You might need to have magic protection to stop you doing that. So Tritons don't need that at all, which I thought was, again, it's interesting to have, but couple that with the resistance to cold damage, I think that would be quite good, because I think we've suffered that as well when we've played in our campaign. We've gone deep into water and we've suffered cold damage, not necessarily the crushing damage.
A lot dependent on your DM and how they're going to play things out. But yeah, that is interesting. But the thing as a spellcaster character player that I love the most is their control air and water ability.
Yes. Yeah.
Where is it level 5? They can cast Wall of Water once per day or something?
Yeah, and which is a spell that's been put in. I assume it's been put in other books as well, but it's actually there in the thing. Do you want to just quickly describe it, Sam?
You conjure up a wall of water on the ground at a point you can see within range. And it's the usual kind of massive, 1 foot thick, 10 feet high, 30 feet long wall. And it kind of makes ranged weapon attacks through it kind of tricky, and fire damage is halved. Personally speaking, it just like visually, just to describe this massive wall of water, that's so cool to be able to do that, even if it's not the most powerful of spells.
But this is the thing, because all it needs is literally a drop of water, so you could get like your water skin out and stuff, and then you probably could do it on land or on your ship, so you could stop any sort of incoming like attacks. You could put out any fires around you as the player. So I think absolutely, it's like a very powerful. I guess compared to say Wall of Fire, and maybe to an extent Mold Earth, I know because obviously you can do that as well. It isn't as destructive because obviously the fire sort of burns everything around you and people can get caught in it. Mold Earth, you change the scape around you when you're like, whoops, it looks a bit of a mess afterwards. With water, then you can stop things like hitting you. And like, even if it gets turned into a wall of ice, then that's like a proper protective barrier, but then it will all melt away and it's not necessarily, I don't know, it's a different way of putting things as well. I'm sure there's like a wall of air as well, like another elemental type, which is just really blowy and nothing gets through. I can't see it being used in the ocean itself. It's something I assume you'd have to be on land for, because otherwise it's just a bit pointless, because then everything's a wall of water in the sea.
But considering the number of fire-breathing characters in D&D,
that's true.
Would be useful.
Brilliant. So those are sort of the three out of quite a few races in Volo's guide, something a little bit different they might want to come across. So Sam, I'm going to really press you now. If you were going to, in your next D&D session, let's say your Thursday lot, if you had to put in an NPC of one of these three, and it doesn't have to be, like, say, related, like, oh, they're going to be in the ocean or anything like that, which one of these would you more likely to put in, would you say?
As things that my players would encounter, I would definitely go for the Firbolgs, because I really like their concept of being actively private and protective as a society. So if my players had an objective that was in the forest, they can find themselves very subtly with signs and kind of ways magically being deterred from proceeding. So it could create this interesting conflict of interest. They don't want to upset whatever this mysterious entity of the forest is that's very politely trying to push them in a different path.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they know if they don't proceed, I know something even worse could happen. Something bad could actually happen to the forest. So, that kind of, well, we're going to have to be bad to be good.
No, I like that. There is something about Firbolgs, because they're so gentle compared to, say, the weird suspiciousness of the Kenku and then the haughtiness of the Tritons, and then to come across a genuinely nice, like wholesome, I'd say, and humble creature, it can really put players on the other foot, because they're like, oh, they're not trying to kill us, they're not trying to get rid of us, they're just really nice people. There's something must be wrong. That's... I think for me, like, I remember I played in a one-shot ages ago, and we were set on a ship, and there was someone who was playing a Triton. It was a very clever idea, I thought. Basically, their Triton was on holiday. They were going on a... they were pretty much a gap year person.
Yeah.
And obviously they'd be like, oh yeah, we're like trying doing the sights and whatnot. And the only reason they were on the ship was because they were just sunbathing and trying out this new concept. They're like, oh, this is great. Yeah, I'm really liking the slight tinge on my scales. Yeah. And then obviously we're coming into things, oh, I don't understand. Well, that's something that you do. Yeah. That's sort of a very girl, a Valley-esque type thing. And it was really entertaining to watch because I was like, I had no idea what Tritons were. I was like, God, this is such a weird concept. I love it. But again, it's one of those things where I don't know if it would work for a campaign. And with all these things, I think the ones that work well for campaigns are longer term sessions. So 3 or 4 sessions perhaps would be Firbolgs over Kenku, which I love Kenku. I think they're great, but it is a little bit more work because you have to describe more things rather than just say what you mean. Keep that flavor up. And then Tritons, I mean, there's only so much haughty nobleness that we can all keep in our lives and role play, I guess.
You could do something like a noble who's fallen from grace, that same kind of exile, but add to it that they've lost their ability to breathe underwater.
Oh, yeah. So get rid of the amphibious sort of trait that they had. Yeah. So they're like, oh no, not for me, thanks. No.
Until they've learnt how to return to their kingdom or something.
It feels very Little Mermaid-esque in a way.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
No, but in a good way. Like they still have their voice, but they can't breathe underwater. So no, I like that.
Never watched Little Mermaid.
Well, there's going to be like the remake of it coming out in like next year or two. So the live action remake we can all watch.
Sure. I mean, I've avoided Aquaman, I've avoided The Shape of Water. I'm probably going to avoid Little Mermaid.
That's
I've got no points of reference.
Yeah, true. I'd completely forgotten that Aquaman was a thing. I have to be honest. It's just a very, very shiny torso. That's all I remember from the poster.
I'm surprised that didn't suck you in to watch the film, to be honest.
Hey, I'm a woman with taste. I'm not attracted by shiny things, honest.
Not a Kenku.
Not a Kenku. So, Sam, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about 3 different races and the role-playing things. I guess, is there anything you want to plug? Is there anything you'd recommend? Where can we find you on the internet if we want to find you on the internet? Put you on the spot now.
Yeah, I don't have a social online presence really like you or Ryan, but yeah, just there's this great other podcast I keep hearing about called What Am I Rolling? Have you?
Yeah, no, I've heard of it. I can go into more detail about that. So my name is Fiona and I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast.
Oh, it's you.
It's
me.
You
who does that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Sorry, I didn't want to be like, oh, clang, it's me. Doing very well. The Call of Cthulhu stuff has been out for a couple of weeks now. Really good. My mother really enjoyed our accents, Sam. So good job.
Well, and she must be being truthful because she wouldn't be nice on purpose. Like,
no. But yeah, that's out. So if I know this is obviously it's past Halloween now at this point, but if you're interested in spooky, scary tales about underwater creatures, we're recording this in the past, Sam. Remember?
I know.
But if you're really into your underwater creatures and spookiness, then obviously come listen to that. We've obviously yourself is on that, and obviously another co-host, David's been on that as well. We've got a few others coming up. We've got Sleepaway, which is a summer camp counselor sort of RPG where you're basically fighting off more fighting off more monsters. Words. I don't know. It's a Saturday afternoon. We're tired.
Take 3.
So we've got that. We've got a thing called Slug Blaster, which is essentially if you're really into your skateboarding RPGs, but also like portaling to other multiple dimensions, that's also a thing, and that's an RPG now, which I'm running.
Wow, that sounds incredible.
It's great. I've had to look up Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 to look at the names of tricks. But yeah, so that will be coming out in the next couple of months. Oh, I also do improv, Clang. I do. I've done various sort of shows online, but more importantly, I've been doing a show called Revenge of the Werewolf, which Sam has very kindly, as my dutiful #1 fan, watched my parts in it and then turned off the other parts, which I appreciate as a performer.
Don't turn it off. I just turn the sound right down.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, Fiona's back. So no. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you, talk to you, do something with you next time. Brilliant. Great. Bye.